We're back talking with Drew Merritt of Humble Roots, and we're discussing landscaping and gardening and doing it environmentally friendly. I understand though that you guys actually not only can, the public obviously come out to your nursery, right? But you take this into some of the alternative schools and help educate young minds about this. What's that like?
It's pretty exciting. I mean, we've led a hike mostly focused on edible wilds as well as just the native plants in general with the kids of the Clare House School in Hood River. This year we took them out around Herman Creek and we're hiking around, and it's really exciting because like some of the kids, they do have an understanding of the plants and kind of some of the relationships that occur, but others, a lot of these kids in this school in particular, they haven't really been outside of a urban setting, so to speak, and haven't really been out in the woods and poked around at all. So taking kids out for the first time and showing them these plants, that are just amazing to us, and sharing that passion with them, it's really exciting to see the kind of really spark start in these kids' eyes. And even this last hike we did, we came across what's known as a phantom orchid, which was a plant that neither Kristen or myself had ever seen before. And so us getting terribly excited about seeing this plant, it just sparked the fire in all the kids too. They're all excited. They're all gathered around. We're talking about this plant and explaining how you have to be very careful with this plant because it's very sensitive, and sharing that information with them. It's a great experience. And then we've also done some work with the Mosier School, established a native plant garden there with the kids. And that's really fun, planting and maintaining a garden with kids. I mean, there's kind of a little bit of where it's kind of, you're down there with third graders planting plants that you've been babying along for 3 or 4 years, and you turn around and they're standing on top of one of them, and you're kind of like, but you get over that pretty quickly just after you see them getting their hands dirty and really enjoying what they're doing and taking something away from it too, which is
right.
crucial.
Now, your wife is also the co-owner with you, and does she also help go and educate?
Oh, certainly. I'd say she's probably the more predominant one in that field.
Oh,
she's
really?
Definitely has a stronger knowledge of the edible and medicinal plants.
Describe then what would be considered an invasive species here in the gorge.
Well, invasive species are certainly a problem throughout the West, but especially in this area. Invasive species are non-native plants that have either been released or escaped either from gardens or were used as grass species, for instance, that were used for stock grazing. A lot of our species that turn our hillsides brown in late summer, those are actually non-native species that were introduced for cattle and sheep to graze on. But they outcompete the native species, and so the diversity of the ecosystem is greatly impacted. Instead of having 100 species in that acre, you end up with just an acre of, say, bachelor buttons or knapweed. In the West Gorge, you end up with Scotch broom and the Himalayan blackberry, for instance. There's some other really nasty ones that are starting to show up, such as the yellow star thistle, and we just had our first occurrence of that in the Mosier area this summer. And that's a plant that can wreak terrible havoc both on the native landscapes as well as for cattle grazers as well, because the cows can't eat these thistle-headed, the star thistle, just because they have these sharp, pointy thorns and stuff like that. But generally what's happening with the noxious species is that they're chasing out, by absorbing the minerals and nutrients in the water that the natives need to survive, they are choking them out and basically just taking over.
And they can actually, like, even after you've tried to uproot them, uprooting them can actually be part of the problem, right?
Yes, because what you're doing when you're pulling the weeds, and it varies species to species, of course, but for instance, like Scotch broom that has a pretty extensive root network or root system, as that's pulled out of the ground, you're disturbing that soil, and disturbance in any sense is going to create the opportunity for invasive species to move in. But with Scotch broom, for instance, the seed can stay viable for up to 50 years. So there's this established seed bank beneath the plant that slowly, as dead leaves and mulch have formed over the top of it, kind of been suppressed. But you pull that plant out, you bring all that seed to the surface, and then next spring or later that fall, it's going to germinate.
So what about then, some of the plants that are here that are indigenous, and the significance of when I was kind of reading about what you do, I had never heard of the term taproot, but that's a very significant, obviously, part of the plant. I mean, it's sort of like the main root, I guess. Mm-hmm. Is that for all plants, or is that because maybe they have to go deeper here to get water, or I don't know? What's the deal?
Most plants do have a taproot of some sort, but in the dryland conditions, it's integral for the plant to survive. I mean, it varies from species to species once again, but for instance, the balsam root that turns our hillsides yellow in spring, That plant has an amazing taproot that takes it, it can take it 10 years to mature to a point where it's actually going to flower. And for those first 10 years, it might only have 2 to 3 or 4 leaves each year. And then the entire growth is just occurring beneath the ground. It's just forming this big, like a carrot-like root, basically, that's just going deeper and deeper. It can be as much as 6 feet down under the ground. Another good example of that is the Oregon white oak, where you plant an acorn, it germinates, the taproot forms. That first year, you're going to have just one set of just 2 little oak leaves, about 2 to 3 inches high. Same thing the next year, same thing the next year, same thing the next year. But during that period, that taproot's now 4 to 6, 8 feet down into the ground, at which point it starts sending out some feeder roots off of that taproot, and then all of a sudden you'll get 4 feet of growth above the ground out of that oak tree. But
would it be safe to say then that part of being environmentally conscious and responsible with your gardening and landscaping is to use plants that are indigenous to the area that you're landscaping or gardening?
Certainly, because with the native plants in your landscape, they require so much less resources. They don't need the water that a lot of the plants that are typically used in conventional landscapes require, so you're not having to irrigate as often. They're used to our soil compositions, assuming the proper plant selection, so they don't need additional fertilizers, and they've evolved with the insect and other invertebrate species of the area. So if there's a pest that attacks that plant, there's typically a predator insect that will feed on that pest. So it's easier to establish an equilibrium in the landscape, which is basically a small ecosystem. So that'll help reduce the need for pesticides and insecticides and all that.
Okay.
Kind of the more going out there, dressing up for war and heading out to your garden kind of doesn't seem like a good idea.
Right.
So using natives allows you to just kind of let it take care of itself. I mean, it does take some water to establish, but once these plants are established, they're going to do their thing just like they do on the hillsides.
Yeah. Well, when we come back from the break, I want to ask you a little bit about that, because you said you basically you put on this like suit of armor to go out there and address your plants. It's like that can't be healthy. And some of these things that you're actually going to at some point maybe even consume. Some of these plants, and you're like, don't get this stuff on your skin and stuff like that. I want to talk to you about that and how you can do that more responsibly and obviously environmentally friendly. So we'll discuss that along with a few other things when we return. Be right back.